Maria Thompson had spent nearly half her life behind the stoves of the same restaurant in Portland, Oregon. At 46, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen kitchens rise and fall, yet never lost her devotion to food. Her hands bore the faint scars of decades of chopping, stirring, baking, and plating, but they were also steady, hands that moved with the precision of muscle memory and the warmth of care. To her, cooking was not a job, but a way of speaking, a language she had mastered long ago. She had started humbly, 2 decades earlier, as an assistant in the kitchen. In those days, she did the unglamorous work, peeling onions, scrubbing pots, staying late after shifts to wipe down stainless steel counters. Over the years, as chefs came and went, Maria remained. Her loyalty and skill earned her the title of head chef more than a decade ago. Since then, she had become the soul of the restaurant. The staff relied on her steady presence, and regular customers asked for her by name. The restaurant itself reflected Portland's charm, intimate, warm, with brick walls and a quiet view of the street outside. It had survived food trends and economic storms, largely because the food Maria crafted spoke for itself. But it wasn't only her talent that kept things together. The owner, David Callahan, had his share of brilliance too. David, now 50, was a man of contrasts. He loved food with a passion equal to Maria's, and when inspired, he could dream up dishes that brought crowds through the doors. He had a boyish smile, an easy laugh, and the kind of charisma that made people forgive him more than they should. Yet behind the charm lay a weakness that had shadowed him for years: cards. Poker, blackjack, whatever the game, he couldn't resist the rush of risk. Maria had watched him stumble in and out of trouble many times. There had been nights when paychecks were delayed for weeks because David had played too deeply into losses. She remembered the whispers of the staff, the frustration that built up when bills went unpaid. And yet, somehow, David always made things right in the end. Money would appear, debts would be cleared, and wages would come with bonuses, as if to soothe the hurt. The staff, weary but loyal, stayed. Maria, more than anyone, forgave him, though she never forgot. It wasn't that she excused his recklessness, but she had known him long enough to see more than his faults. David wasn't greedy. He wasn't cruel. He was, at his core, a man adrift, someone who could be brilliant when he focused, but who too often let himself drown in his own flaws. And perhaps because Maria had spent years anchoring herself in the heat of the kitchen, she allowed herself to anchor him too. On that particular morning, Maria pushed open the back door of the restaurant with her usual tote slung over her shoulder. The autumn air outside had been crisp, tinged with the earthy smell of wet leaves. Inside, the familiar scent of yeast and simmering stock should have been comforting. But as she stepped across the threshold, she felt a ripple of unease. Something was off. It wasn't visible at first glance. The kitchen looked the same. Knives lined in their racks, copper pans gleaming dully under fluorescent light, prep stations ready for the day ahead. Yet Maria's instincts, sharpened by years of weathering both quiet mornings and stormy nights in this place, told her something was waiting. She paused with her hand resting on the counter, listening. The muffled sound of staff voices carried faintly from the front of the house, hushed and clustered, unlike the normal bustle of setting tables and brewing coffee. Her heart tightened. Staff only gathered like that when news had traveled fast, and never good news. Maria straightened her shoulders, adjusting her chef's coat. Whatever it was, she would face it. She had spent too many years here to be easily shaken. But as she walked toward the dining room, her steps were heavier than usual, as though her body already knew the weight of what her ears had yet to hear. The day was beginning like any other, yet the air in the restaurant felt changed, thick with an invisible tension. Maria's unease deepened with each step, the certainty forming inside her that this would not be just another morning in her kitchen. In the dining room, Maria found a small knot of waiters and bussers gathered near the hostess stand. They weren't setting tables or polishing glasses. Instead, they stood in a circle, whispering with pale faces, their voices tense, their hands twisting napkins or tugging at sleeves. The moment Maria appeared, the group went silent. Her brow furrowed. Why isn't anyone working? What's going on? A young waitress, barely out of college, shifted nervously. Maria, you haven't heard? Heard what? Her voice sharpened. She set her tote bag on a nearby chair, arms crossing. David, the girl began and then faltered. Someone else finished for her. Blurting it out as though pulling off a bandage, he lost the restaurant. In a poker game. Last night. The word struck Maria like a blow to the chest. For a heartbeat, she simply stared, waiting for someone to laugh, to shake their head, to admit it was some cruel rumor. But the silence that followed told her all she needed to know. Her throat tightened. Where is he? In his office, the hostess whispered. Maria didn't waste another second. She turned on her heel, her shoes clicking sharply against the wooden floor as she strode toward the back hallway. Every step felt heavier than the last. At David's office door, she didn't bother knocking. She pushed it open, her eyes locking onto him at once. He was slumped behind his desk, a cigarette burning low between his fingers, a gray haze curling around his face. He looked up briefly, then dropped his gaze as though unable to meet hers. "Tell me it isn't true," Maria said, her voice quiet but edged with steel. David gave a hollow laugh and gestured vaguely with the cigarette. "I'm guessing they already told you at the front." "David," she pressed, stepping into the room, "what have you done?" For a moment, he said nothing. Then he ground the cigarette into the ashtray with slow finality. "I made a mistake." His voice was rough, almost broken. "I thought I could win it back. Thought I had the cards. But I didn't. And now," he exhaled, leaning back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling as if hoping the plaster could swallow him whole. "Now the place is gone. He'll be here tomorrow morning to sign the papers." Maria's stomach dropped. Tomorrow. It was that immediate, that final. "You promised me," she whispered, her anger trembling beneath the words. "You swore you were done with this." "I know." His voice cracked. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. "I know, Maria, but I slipped, and there's no undoing it." For a long, heavy silence, Maria simply stood there. Her chest ached with conflicting feelings, fury, sorrow, disbelief. She wanted to shake him, to scream at him for destroying everything they had built together. But she also saw the defeat in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged like a man twice his age. It wasn't greed that had led him here, nor malice. It was his own weakness, the flaw that had always haunted him. And there was nothing she could do to change it. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She turned without another word and left the office, her heart hammering, her mind spinning. Back in the kitchen, Maria tied on her apron and reached for a cutting board. The familiar rhythm of her work, the scrape of knife against wood, the scent of garlic beneath her blade, steadied her hands if not her spirit. She moved briskly, focusing on each task, each motion, as if the discipline of cooking could shield her from the storm raging inside. But even as she chopped and stirred, her thoughts ran in circles. Tomorrow, everything she had given 20 years to would belong to someone else. Tomorrow, this kitchen might no longer be hers. Her staff cast anxious glances at her from the corners of the room, waiting to see if she would break. But Maria did not falter. She kept her back straight, her hand steady. Only her eyes, fixed on the simmering pot before her, betrayed the truth. Behind their calm surface was a woman reeling from betrayal and bracing for the inevitable. And though the kitchen hummed with ordinary sounds, the clatter of pans, the hiss of steam, Maria felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground trembling beneath her feet. Tomorrow was coming, and with it a fall she could not stop. By late afternoon, the restaurant had fallen into an uneasy lull. Staff moved about the dining room in stilted motions, waiting for something they did not want to face but could not avoid. The news had spread. David had gambled everything away, and though the papers weren't yet signed, the man who had claimed the restaurant was already on his way. Though the official handover wasn't scheduled until the next morning, Tyler arrived early, already acting as if the place was his. The front doors swung open just before dusk. A group of young men spilled inside, loud and swaggering, their laughter cutting sharply through the quiet air. At their center walked Tyler Callahan, David's 30-year-old nephew. He wore designer sneakers, a leather jacket thrown carelessly over his shoulders, and an expression that announced he had nothing to prove. His eyes scanned the space with the restless boredom of someone who believed the world already belonged to him. "Well," he drawled, his voice carrying across the dining room, "this is the place I've inherited. Looks quaint." His friends chuckled, already drifting toward the bar as if it were theirs. Maria stepped forward instinctively, her chef's coat still marked with the traces of the day's work. She didn't say a word, but her presence alone demanded respect. Tyler's gaze landed on her, and his smirk widened. "And who's this?" he asked, gesturing toward her with a flick of his hand. "I'm the head chef," Maria replied evenly. Her voice was calm, but inside her chest her heart pounded. "The head chef," Tyler repeated mockingly. He let out a laugh, turning to his friends. "More like an old relic. What is she, 50? 60? Time for some new blood, don't you think?" The group erupted in cruel laughter, and Maria felt heat rise to her face. She had been called many things in her career: strict, demanding, stubborn, but never dismissed so thoughtlessly, never reduced to nothing more than an insult about her age. Tyler stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make the words sting. "Your time's up, old lady. Go home. We'll find someone younger who knows what's trending. This isn't your kitchen anymore." For a moment, the room froze. The wait staff, the bartenders, even David, who had emerged silently from his office, stood rooted to the floor. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting to see how Maria would respond. She could have argued. She could have demanded the respect she had earned through decades of labor, through nights spent building this place with her own 2 hands. But something inside her broke at the contempt in his eyes. She realized, with sudden clarity, that no words would matter. He saw her as nothing. Maria unknotted the apron from her waist with slow, deliberate movements. She removed her chef's hat and set both down on the counter. Then, with her head held high, she walked past Tyler and out through the swinging doors. It wasn't until she stepped into the evening air that her composure cracked. Tears blurred her vision as she hurried down the sidewalk, fumbling for her phone in her pocket, only to realize it was the only thing she had taken with her. Her purse, her keys, even the small photographs she kept in her locker, all left behind in the kitchen that had defined her life. She walked blindly, her chest tight with humiliation. The city lights flickered on one by one, but she barely noticed. Portland's familiar streets felt foreign now, each step carrying her further from the place she had called home for 20 years. By the time she reached her apartment, her legs ached and her face was wet with tears. She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. The apartment felt unbearably quiet. For years, she had measured her life by the rhythms of the kitchen, the clang of pots, the hiss of steam, the shouts of line cooks. Now the silence pressed in on her like a weight. For a long time she sat there, trembling with anger and grief. Then, slowly, she pulled herself upright. Sitting in that silence would only break her further. She needed to move, to breathe, to remind herself that the world still existed beyond the walls of that restaurant. She changed into jeans and a jacket, wiped her face, and stepped back outside. The night air was cool, laced with the smell of rain on pavement. She began to walk with no destination in mind, letting the rhythm of her steps and the hum of the city steady her heart. Somewhere behind her, the restaurant's doors had closed, and with them, the life she had built. Ahead lay only the uncertainty of what would come next. The hours passed slowly in her apartment, each tick of the clock pulling Maria deeper into a restlessness she couldn't shake. She tried lying down, but the silence pressed too heavily against her chest. She turned on the television, but the voices on the screen blurred into meaningless sound. For years, her nights had been claimed by the rhythm of the restaurant. The rush of orders, the clatter of plates, the hum of conversation in the dining room. To sit alone now felt unbearable, like being cut adrift from the very pulse that had sustained her life. Close to midnight, Maria stood and grabbed her jacket. The thought had been tugging at her since she walked out. Her belongings were still in the restaurant. Her purse, her keys, even her locker with a few personal keepsakes. She couldn't leave them behind, not in that place where strangers now roamed as if they owned it. More than that, she simply couldn't stay still any longer. The streets of Portland were alive with late-night wanderers. Couples strolled arm in arm, laughter spilling from nearby bars. Bicycles flashed past with streaks of neon. Maria walked quickly, her breath visible in the cool air, her heart pounding with something between anger and grief. By the time she reached the familiar brick exterior of the restaurant, her steps slowed. Light still glowed inside, spilling faintly through the windows. She hesitated, pressing herself into the shadows of the alley. That was when she saw them. A few of Tyler's friends, the same rowdy companions who had swaggered in earlier, slipping out the side door in a hurry. They muttered to each other, glancing back nervously before disappearing into the night. Maria frowned. Their exit didn't look like the carefree swagger she had seen hours before. Something about the way they rushed off unsettled her. She approached the back entrance. The door wasn't fully closed. It hung slightly ajar. Caution prickled at her, but curiosity pushed harder. She slipped inside, her footsteps silent on the tiled floor. The restaurant was eerily quiet. Chairs were askew. A glass sat half empty on the bar. She moved cautiously toward the dining room, her eyes scanning the space. That was when she saw him. Tyler Callahan. He was slumped forward over one of the tables, his head resting on his arm, an abandoned bottle at his side. For a moment, Maria exhaled sharply through her nose. Of course, drunk and careless, she should have turned and walked away, let him wallow in the mess he had created. But something stopped her. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the nagging sense that the silence in the room wasn't right. She stepped closer, her shoes clicking lightly against the floor. "Tyler," she said cautiously, her voice carrying in the empty space. "You need to lock the doors before you pass out in here." He didn't move. Maria's frown deepened. She reached out, intending only to shake his shoulder lightly, to wake him enough that she could grab her things and leave. But as her hand touched him, his body tilted unnaturally, sliding off the table. Maria caught him instinctively and gasped. His skin was clammy, his lips tinged a frightening shade of blue. His chest rose only faintly, shallow and uneven. He wasn't drunk. He was in crisis. "God," Maria whispered, adrenaline flooding her. Her hands trembled as she lowered him carefully onto the floor. She had worked kitchens her whole life, but she wasn't a nurse, wasn't a doctor. Still, training from years ago, those mandatory CPR sessions every employee had to take, rose sharply in her memory. Her phone was in her pocket. She dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "This is 911. What's your emergency?" "There's a man. He's collapsed," she said quickly, forcing the words out. "He's not breathing right. His lips are blue. I think it's his heart. Please, send someone fast." The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady. "Ma'am, stay on the line. Help is on the way. Do you know how to begin CPR?" "Yes," Maria said, kneeling beside Tyler. "Yes, I do." She tilted his head back, checking his airway, pressing her ear close to his mouth. The faint, uneven gasps made her chest tighten. She laced her fingers together and began chest compressions, counting under her breath, her own heartbeat racing with every push. The restaurant that had been filled with humiliation only hours before now echoed with the sound of her voice, steady and urgent, as she fought to keep life inside the body of the man who had tried to strip her of her dignity. Maria didn't stop to think about irony or justice. In that moment, instinct had taken over, and though her arms ached and her tears blurred her vision, she pressed harder, refusing to let him slip away. Somewhere in the distance, faint at first, the wail of sirens cut through the Portland night. The sirens grew louder until red and blue lights washed over the restaurant walls. Paramedics rushed in, their voices brisk and practiced. Maria stepped back, her arms shaking from the effort of compressions, her chest heaving with adrenaline. She watched as they checked Tyler's pulse, applied oxygen, and prepared to transport him. One of the medics gave her a brief nod. "You did the right thing," he said. "You may have saved his life." And then they were gone. Tyler on the stretcher, the team sweeping him into the night, leaving only silence in their wake. Maria stood frozen for a moment, her palms damp, her knees weak. It was only when the last echo of the sirens faded that she fumbled for her phone again. There was only one person she needed to call. David answered on the second ring. His voice was groggy, heavy with despair. "Maria." "You need to come," she said. "Now. It's Tyler. He collapsed here. The ambulance just left." A pause, then a sharp inhale. "I'll be right there." 15 minutes later, David appeared, his hair disheveled, his coat thrown hastily over his shoulders. His eyes darted around the restaurant, taking in the overturned chair, the half-empty glass still on the table, the faint trace of chaos left behind. "What happened?" he asked. Maria told him in clipped words, too drained to dress the story in details. She had found Tyler slumped over. She had called 911. She had kept him alive until the paramedics arrived. As she spoke, David listened in silence, his hands braced against the edge of a table as if he needed the wood beneath his fingers to steady him. David rubbed his temples, his eyes red-rimmed, not from lack of sleep, but from something deeper. Shame, maybe, or fear. "He's just a kid," he whispered, more to himself than to Maria. "I handed him the keys to this place without knowing he was falling apart. I should have seen it." When she finished, a heavy stillness settled over them. The restaurant, usually filled with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, now felt cavernous and hollow. Only the hum of the refrigerator in the back broke the quiet. David lowered himself into a chair, motioning for her to sit across from him. For a long while, neither spoke. They simply sat there, the weight of the night pressing down on both of them. Finally, David gave a tired laugh, one without joy but not without feeling. "You've always been stronger than me, Maria. I lose everything in a game of cards, and you're the one holding it all together. You always have been." Maria looked at him, her expression soft but weary. "Strength isn't enough to fix everything, David." He leaned back, exhaling. His eyes searched hers, as though he were about to confess something deeper. And then, almost carelessly, the word slipped out. "Marry me, Maria." For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. She blinked, sitting straighter. "What did you just say?" He gave a half-shrug, almost sheepish. "Marry me. I mean, why not? You're the only person who's ever believed in me. You're the only reason this place has survived as long as it has. We could stop pretending we're just tied to this restaurant. We could be tied to each other." Maria let out a startled laugh. "You're proposing in the middle of the night, after your nephew nearly died in this dining room." David smiled faintly, though his eyes shone with a vulnerability she had rarely seen. "I'm serious, Maria. I don't want to lose you. Not after everything." Her first instinct was to brush it off, to call it a joke born from exhaustion. But as she studied him, his slumped shoulders, the way his voice cracked slightly at the edges, something shifted inside her. He wasn't playing. He wasn't trying to charm his way out of another mistake. For once, he was simply being honest. Maria's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. You have the worst timing imaginable. Maybe, he admitted, but do I have your answer? She let the silence stretch a heartbeat longer before she said, softly, yes, David, you do. They left the restaurant together as dawn broke over Portland. The streets glistened with last night's rain, the air damp and cool against their skin. Side by side, their hands found each other naturally, fingers entwining. For the first time in years, Maria felt something other than weariness. She felt the fragile spark of possibility, the whisper of a life that could still be remade. And as they walked together into the gray morning, the heaviness of the night began to lift, replaced by a quiet warmth neither of them had expected. Morning light broke through the wide windows of the restaurant, painting the dining room in a pale wash of gray. The night had left Maria and David drained, though neither had slept. They sat at one of the corner tables, 2 cups of untouched coffee cooling between them, their silence heavy but not uncomfortable. The quiet was broken by the creak of the front door. Maria looked up, expecting perhaps one of the staff or even the landlord. Instead, a tall man in a perfectly cut suit stepped inside. His presence filled the room instantly, not because of volume, but because of the authority he carried like a second skin. His silver hair caught the morning light, his sharp eyes scanning the space with purpose. "Mr. Callahan," David murmured, rising halfway to his feet. His voice carried both surprise and dread. Maria's breath caught. She recognized him almost immediately. Senator William Callahan, a figure often seen on local news broadcasts, a man who spoke from podiums with the weight of the state behind him. And he was Tyler's father. The senator's gaze softened as it settled on Maria. "You're the one," he said quietly. "You're the woman who called 911, the one who kept my son alive." Maria shifted uncomfortably under the gravity of his attention. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," William said firmly. "Not anyone. Most people would have walked away. I owe you more than I can ever repay." He drew out a chair and sat with the air of someone accustomed to being obeyed, though his tone remained measured. He glanced briefly at David, whose face was pale, his hands tightening on the back of a chair. "I've spoken with the doctors," the senator continued. "Tyler's condition has been unstable for some time. He should have had surgery years ago, but his mother," his words caught, and he shook his head as though brushing away the past. "What matters now is that you gave us another chance with him. For that, I am deeply grateful." Maria inclined her head, still unsettled by the formality of his gratitude. But David, clearly struggling, finally spoke. "Senator, about the restaurant." "Tyler," William's sharp eyes cut to him. "Yes, I've heard whispers already." David swallowed. "I lost it. In a game. Last night. He was supposed to take ownership this morning." "The papers, they're not signed," the senator interrupted. "No," David admitted. William leaned back, the faintest trace of relief crossing his face. Then his expression hardened into one of cold authority. "Then listen carefully, David. There is no deal. There is no transfer. You are still the legal owner of this place, and you will remain so. Whatever arrangement was made over a table of cards has no bearing here." The words seemed to release something in the room. Maria exhaled slowly, only then realizing how tightly she'd been holding her breath. David sagged into his chair, his face etched with disbelief and something like hope. William reached into his jacket and withdrew a card. He set it gently on the table between them. "This has my direct number. If you need anything at all, you call me. Consider it the smallest measure of repayment for saving my son's life." Maria stared at the card, its embossed lettering gleaming in the morning light. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her. A man who could have dismissed her entirely was instead offering his hand his gratitude. It felt like a lifeline after days of drowning. The senator stood, buttoning his suit jacket with deliberate calm. "I will take care of Tyler. He will get the medical attention he should have had long ago. As for you, his eyes moved between Maria and David. Protect this place. It deserves better than to be gambled away. And with that, he turned and walked out, his polished shoes clicking steadily against the floor until the door swung shut behind him. For a long moment, neither Maria nor David spoke. The card still lay on the table, glinting softly, like a promise that everything had not yet been lost. Maria finally looked at David. Do you understand what just happened? David gave a disbelieving laugh, rubbing his hand over his face. We just got our lives back, Maria. And for Maria, who had walked home in despair just hours ago, the shift felt almost unreal, like stepping from storm into sunlight. The senator's departure left a silence that felt almost unreal, as though the air itself had shifted. The card he had left gleamed faintly under the morning light, its presence a reminder that the storm hanging over the restaurant had broken in their favor. For the first time in days, maybe years, David's face showed something other than exhaustion or regret. He sat back in his chair, staring around the dining room as though seeing it anew. Maria, he said softly, I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for what you did last night. For saving Tyler, for standing by me when you had every reason to walk away. Maria's eyes softened, though her voice was steady. I didn't do it for you, David. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I know, he said quickly, almost with a smile, and that makes it mean even more. He leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. But I can't keep pretending this place was ever just mine. Without you, there wouldn't have been a restaurant to lose in the first place. You've carried it for 20 years. She tilted her head, unsure of where he was leading. I want to give you half of it, David continued. Legally. The papers, the ownership, everything. It's the least I can do. You deserve it more than I do. For a moment, Maria was silent. The word stunned her, not because she doubted his sincerity, but because she knew how rare it was for David to relinquish anything. This restaurant had been his pride, his folly, his entire identity. And now here he was, offering half of it as a gift. Her lips parted to respond, but before she could, David smirked faintly, his tone shifting. Although, he added, there might be a simpler way. Instead of splitting papers and lawyers and contracts, I could just marry you. Then we wouldn't have to divide anything. Maria blinked, then let out a startled laugh. David Callahan, that is the most unromantic proposal I've ever heard. He shrugged, though his eyes shone with a nervous glint. I'm a practical man, Maria. Always have been. Practical, she teased, arching an eyebrow. You nearly gambled away everything you own. That's your idea of practical. David chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. Fair point, but you know what I mean. His expression softened, losing its usual armor of humor. I don't want you to carry this place alone anymore. I don't want you to carry me alone anymore, either. I want us. For real this time. Something inside Maria shifted. For years, she had stood at his side as colleague, confidant, sometimes even as caretaker. She had seen him at his worst, forgiven him more than most people ever would. And yet, she had never let herself imagine a future with him beyond the boundaries of the kitchen. Now, as he looked at her with that mixture of sheepishness and sincerity, she felt something bloom where only weariness had lived before. She laughed again, but this time it was softer, warmer. You really are terrible at this, you know. But as she looked at him, really looked, she saw the fear behind the smirk, the way his fingers fidgeted with the edge of the table. He wasn't asking out of convenience. He was asking out of hope. And for the first time, Maria allowed herself to hope too. Terrible at what? At being romantic. Then teach me, he said simply. The silence stretched, but it was no longer heavy. Maria leaned back, a smile lingering on her lips. For the first time in what felt like forever, she saw not only the man who stumbled, but also the man who kept trying to stand again. And she realized that, despite everything, she wanted to keep standing with him. The tension that had gripped her chest since yesterday eased. In its place came a fragile but steady warmth, a sense that maybe, just maybe, there was still a future worth holding on to. David reached across the table, his hand covering hers. She didn't pull away. For two people who had walked through years of loneliness and mistakes, the gesture was simple. Yet it carried the weight of something long overdue, the recognition that they no longer had to face the world alone. The weeks that followed carried a quiet transformation. What had once been a place haunted by uncertainty now thrummed with new energy. With the help of Senator William Callahan's gratitude, the restaurant received a shipment of gleaming new equipment, state-of-the-art ovens, sleek refrigerators, tools that made even seasoned chefs marvel. To Maria, each piece felt less like machinery and more like a gift, a promise that her work still mattered. She threw herself into the kitchen with renewed devotion. Her days stretched long, but she welcomed the hours. There was comfort in the rhythm of chopping vegetables, the perfume of herbs filling the air, the hiss of sauces simmering just right. For the first time in years, she no longer felt like she was simply surviving. She was creating again, shaping dishes with love rather than obligation. Customers noticed. Word spread quickly that the old restaurant had been reborn. Tables filled each night, laughter and conversation spilling from the dining room, the hum of life weaving itself back into the walls. Staff, once weary from late paychecks and tension, now worked with pride, their confidence returning as if the restaurant itself had taken a deep, cleansing breath. Maria moved among them, her presence steady, her voice calm. She was no longer just the woman who had carried the restaurant through storms. She was its heart. And though she remained humble, a spark of joy returned to her eyes, one that had been missing for far too long. David was never far from her side. He still had his moments of frustration, his self-deprecating humor, but something about him had changed too. The weight that had dragged him down seemed lighter, as if Maria's acceptance had steadied him in a way no amount of luck or charm ever could. He teased her endlessly about the new machines, claiming she spoke more tenderly to the ovens than to him. "They never talk back," she replied once, a smirk tugging at her lips. He clutched his chest dramatically. "So that's all it takes to win your affection? I'll keep my mouth shut from now on." Maria rolled her eyes, but the warmth in her smile betrayed her. Their banter filled the spaces between orders, and for the staff, it became a kind of reassurance. Proof that even in a world of debts and near losses, joy could be reclaimed. At night, when the last customer had gone and the chairs were stacked on tables, Maria would linger in the kitchen, polishing the new equipment until it shone. David would lean against the doorway, watching her with a fondness that no longer needed words. Sometimes he teased, sometimes he simply joined her, drying pans or wiping counters. They worked side by side, not out of duty, but out of choice. It was in those quiet moments that Maria realized how different life felt now. After years of giving everything to a place that had nearly slipped away, she was no longer afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The future was uncertain, yes, but it was theirs, and that was enough. One morning, as the city slowly stirred awake, David reached for her hand as they stepped outside. The rain had passed during the night, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the pale sunrise. Portland's air was damp and cool, carrying the faint smell of coffee drifting from nearby cafes. They walked together down the block, their fingers intertwined, their steps unhurried. There was no need for grand declarations. The silence between them was full, steady, and content. Maria glanced at him, and in that moment, she didn't see the gambler who had nearly lost everything. She saw the man who had chosen to change, who had chosen her. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that happiness, late as it had come, was real. As the early light bathed them in soft gold, Maria and David kept walking, hand in hand, ready to begin again.
The world keeps turning, and with each turn comes a new story. When one door closes, another opens, leading us into a journey entirely different. Let us set aside the echoes of the tale just past and step together into a new realm where another destiny awaits to be told. And now I invite you to listen to the second story, A Path of Its Own, unrelated to what came before, yet filled with mysteries and surprises meant only for those willing to journey onward with me.
The dog was trembling in my arms, its wiry fur prickling against my cheek, while three men circled like wolves. Their laughter was sharp, cutting through the cold evening air, and every step they took closed the gap between us. I had nowhere to run. "Put it down, sweetheart. Dogs don't like liars," one of them said, smirking as he reached out. My legs felt like stone, but my arms tightened around the dog's small body. I could hear its fast, panicked heartbeat against mine, and I swear my own matched it beat for beat. I wasn't scared of dogs. I was scared of men like them, the kind that looked at a girl alone on a roadside and thought it was their business. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but headlights cut across the dark road, slicing through the scene. A black SUV rolled to a stop behind us. A man stepped out. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He simply looked at them, tall and steady, his voice low and even. "Walk away." Something in his tone made even the loudest of the three flinch. One of them muttered something under his breath, but they backed off, peeling away into the shadows like smoke on wind. The stranger turned to me. His eyes were calm, almost too calm, like nothing we'd just witnessed had surprised him. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head, hugging the dog closer, though my arms were shaking. He glanced at the dog, then at me. "Does it belong to you?" "No. I found him." "They were." I couldn't finish. He nodded once, then held out a hand. Not to touch me, but to take the dog. "He's scared. You are too. Let's get you both out of here." There was something about the way he said it, matter of fact, yet oddly gentle, that made my resistance collapse. I followed him to the SUV, still holding the dog because I wasn't ready to let go. Inside, it smelled like leather and faint coffee. Warmth flowed from the vents, chasing away the chill that had wrapped around me for days, maybe weeks. He adjusted the mirrors, started driving, and for a while neither of us spoke. Only when my hand stopped trembling did he ask, "What's your name?" "Jenna. Jenna Myers." "I'm Ethan Cole." He didn't look at me, eyes fixed on the road. "Where were you headed?" The answer caught in my throat. I had nowhere. Not anymore. Just away. He didn't push. He didn't even glance at me to judge my vagueness. Instead, he pointed to the dog curled against my lap, already asleep. "You keeping him?" I almost laughed, the sound rough and uneven. "I don't even have a place for myself, let alone for him." "Then maybe tonight you both do," he said simply, taking an exit off the main road. The highway lights faded as trees gathered around us, tall and whispering. I glanced at him, unsure why I trusted a man I'd just met, but the fear I'd felt minutes ago was gone, replaced by something stranger, a fragile kind of safety. We pulled up to a gated property. Beyond it, a house stood like a piece of glass, dropped into the wilderness, modern angles, large windows, and quiet power. He opened the gate with a remote and drove through. "You can stay in the guest house. It's separate from mine. No one will bother you there," he said, his tone more factual than kind, as if kindness was too obvious to name. I followed him inside, clutching the dog, stepping into warm light and polished wood. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had been ready to spend the night on a bench at a train station, and instead, I was standing in a stranger's guest house, safe. "Lock the door from inside when I leave. Tomorrow we'll talk about what you need. Food's in the fridge, towels in the bathroom." He set a set of keys on the counter, then paused. "You look like someone who hasn't had one good night's sleep in a long time." I swallowed hard, not because he was wrong, but because it felt like he'd seen straight through me. "Thank you. I mean it." He nodded and walked out, leaving me with the quiet hum of heating and the soft breathing of the dog now curled on the floor. I slid to the edge of the bed, hands still shaking, but for the first time in weeks, it wasn't from fear, it was from relief. I didn't know who Ethan Cole really was, or why he'd stopped for me. All I knew was that, for tonight, I wasn't alone. And that felt like a miracle I hadn't earned. When I finally closed my eyes in that guest house bed, I thought sleep would come fast. But it didn't. Memories have a way of creeping in when the world goes quiet. I wasn't running away because I wanted adventure. I was running because I had nowhere left to go. I grew up in a small apartment above a hardware store. Just me and Mom for most of my childhood. Dad left when I was 5, no dramatic farewell. Just a note on the counter and a bank account emptied to the last cent. Mom cried for weeks, then hardened like stone. She worked double shifts at the hospital, always tired, always on edge, but she made sure I had what I needed. When I was 17, she met Mark. He was polite at first, too polite. He brought flowers, washed dishes after dinner, laughed at all the right jokes. I wanted to like him, if only for Mom's sake. She deserved someone to love her back, but over time his tone sharpened, like knives you don't notice until they cut. Mark didn't like me. I don't know if it was because I reminded him I was part of Mom's life before him, or because I wouldn't just vanish into my room every time he came home. He started small, comments about how I left my shoes by the door, how the fridge was always empty, how I never did enough to help. I was helping. I always had. At 16, I worked weekends at a cafe, saving for college while taking care of our bills whenever Mom fell short. I studied accounting because she said it was safe, stable, something that would keep me from repeating her mistakes. I listened, even when it chipped at my own dreams. I loved art, pencils, charcoal, color smudges on my hands, but I buried it. I buried me. When I turned 21, I thought things might finally settle. I had finished community college, lined up interviews, paid off some of Mom's medical debt without her even knowing. But Mark was still there, still picking at every thread of my life. The last fight started over something so stupid it almost feels unreal now. I'd made dinner, pasta, nothing fancy. But apparently I used the wrong pan. He shouted. I shouted back. Then he said the one thing I can't unhear. You're just like your father, useless and ready to run when things get hard. I froze. Mom didn't. She slammed her hand on the table and told me to apologize to him, as if his words were truth carved in stone. I grabbed my bag, threw in a couple of clothes, my sketchbook, and what little cash I had. Mom followed me to the door, eyes wide, mouth open like she might say something, but she didn't. She just let me go. I took the bus to the station and bought the cheapest ticket north, thinking maybe Dad would take me in, even after all these years. I'd heard he was in Washington, working some seasonal construction job, living with a new family. I didn't have his phone number, only an address scribbled on a Christmas card he once sent when I was 13. When I finally got there, tired and freezing, a woman opened the door. She had 2 little boys clinging to her legs, hair messy from a long day. She looked at me like she knew who I was. And then she said it, he's not here. He's up north, weeks at a time. And honestly, he's moved on. I'm sorry. She was kind enough to let me sleep on their couch one night. But in the morning, she asked me not to come back. It wasn't cruel, just final. So I kept moving. One town to the next, looking for anything. A job, a couch, a break. Instead, I got chased down by strangers with nothing better to do on a cold evening. And that's when Ethan appeared. Lying there in his guest house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. But safety is dangerous when you're used to fighting for every scrap of it. Part of me whispered not to trust it. People help because they want something, right? That's what Mark always said. Still, there was something about Ethan's voice, steady and unbothered, like someone who doesn't need anything from you at all. Someone who just shows up. Maybe tomorrow I'd thank him properly. Maybe I'd leave before I overstayed. But tonight, wrapped in warmth I hadn't earned, I let my eyes finally close. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. I woke up to sunlight streaming through tall windows, warm and golden, like it had been waiting just for me. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I saw the dog curled at the foot of the bed and remembered. Ethan, the SUV, the guest house. The dog's tail thumped when I stirred. "Morning, buddy," I whispered, rubbing his head. His whole body wiggled like he'd just won the lottery. For all I knew, maybe he had. We both had. I showered in water that didn't take 3 minutes to warm up, used a towel that didn't smell like bleach from a laundromat, and stood in front of the little kitchenette wondering what to do next. Leave. Stay until he told me to go? I wasn't used to kindness with no strings attached. A knock came at the door. My pulse jumped, but when I opened it, it was just Ethan. Jeans, gray t-shirt, hair still damp like he'd come straight from his own shower. He looked less intimidating in daylight, though his eyes were the same. Calm, measuring, like he carried his own storms but didn't let them spill on anyone else. "You sleep?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, better than in a long time." "Good. You hungry?" I hesitated. Accepting food felt like accepting a favor I'd have to repay. "A little." He stepped back. "Come to the main house when you're ready. And bring him." He pointed at the dog, now wagging his tail like crazy. Breakfast was eggs, bacon, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I ate slow, aware of how surreal it all felt, me. A stray girl with a stray dog, sitting in a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine. When I finished, Ethan pushed a folder across the counter. "This is a job description. I need someone to keep the place running. Laundry, cleaning, cooking when you feel like it. Nothing crazy. Pays fair, and you can stay in the guest house rent-free as long as you want." I blinked. "You're offering me a job?" "You need one. I need someone I can trust." His voice was steady, like it was no big deal, like offering work and housing to a stranger was just Tuesday for him. "But you don't even know me." He shrugged. "I know you picked up a dog and held your ground against 3 guys twice your size. That's enough character reference for me." I stared at him, not sure whether to laugh or cry. "I'm not a housekeeper. I mean, I can cook and clean, but—" "Good enough," he cut in. "You'll figure it out. If you want it." I should have said no. I should have thanked him and walked out before things got complicated. But when I looked out the window toward the guest house, sunlight spilling across the grass like a welcome mat, I couldn't. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll do it." Something softened in his expression. Just for a second, like a cloud parting. "Great. You start today. There's a credit card for groceries, supplies. I'll show you where everything is." By noon, I had my own set of keys, a closet stocked with cleaning supplies, and a refrigerator that actually belonged to me. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was mine. For the first time since leaving home, I wasn't drifting. That night, after scrubbing countertops and folding laundry I hadn't worn, I sat on the guest house porch with the dog, who I'd named Lucky, and watched the sun drop behind the trees. The quiet felt different here, safe, not lonely. I still didn't know why Ethan Cole had stopped for me that night, why he'd trusted me enough to offer a job and a roof over my head. Maybe he was one of those rare people who helped without keeping score. Or maybe he was lonely too. Either way, for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to hope for. Maybe I'd landed somewhere I could stay at least for a little while. The first week passed in quiet routine. Morning coffee with Lucky wagging his tail at my feet, laundry humming in the background, the soft smell of pine trees slipping through the windows. I hadn't realized how much I craved ordinary days, the kind where no one yelled, where silence wasn't punishment but peace. Ethan kept his distance, which surprised me. I'd expected some hidden condition, some reason he'd taken me in. But he didn't ask questions beyond the basics, didn't hover, didn't pry. He just let me work. The main house was sleek and modern, but somehow warm, filled with natural wood and sunlight. My favorite place to clean was the glass-walled living room overlooking the forest. Sometimes, when no one was looking, I'd stand there with a cloth in my hand and breathe, just breathe. It felt like standing inside a painting. And maybe that's what sparked it, the urge I hadn't felt in years. I dug out my old sketchbook from the bottom of my bag one evening. The cover was frayed, pages curled from travel, but it still smelled faintly of graphite and old dreams. I sharpened the one pencil I had left and started to draw. First, Lucky curled up on the porch, then the row of fir trees outside, then the guest house itself. My hands remembered even when my mind had forgotten. Lines flowed easily, shapes turning into life. I lost hours to it, so much that when I finally looked up, night had settled over the property and I'd missed dinner completely. The next morning, I found Ethan standing at the porch railing, holding one of my sketches. I froze, heat rushing to my face. "This yours?" he asked, turning the paper so the early light showed every pencil mark. "Yes." "Sorry, don't apologize." He looked at it for another moment, then at me. "You're good. Really good." I shrugged, uncomfortable. "It's just a hobby." I was supposed to be an accountant. Safe job, good pay, stable. His mouth tilted just slightly. "You sound like someone repeating what they were told to want." I didn't answer because he was right. That night, he came back from town with something under his arm, a set of sketch pencils and a pad of paper, crisp and new. "For you," he said simply, setting them on the counter. "I can't accept this. You're working. You're earning. Call it an advance on your paycheck." My throat tightened, the kind of tight that comes when gratitude is so sharp it hurts. "Thank you." He nodded once and went upstairs, leaving me staring at the clean white pages like they were some kind of doorway. Maybe they were. Over the next weeks, I filled them. Lucky sleeping by the fireplace, the way morning mist clung to the tree line, even Ethan once, just his silhouette against the kitchen window as he poured coffee. He never said much about the drawings, but every now and then, I'd catch him glancing at one with a look I couldn't quite name. And me? I was changing. I wasn't just cleaning a house. I was building something inside myself I'd thought was gone. The fear I'd carried from my mom's apartment, from Mark's words, from every closed door on the road, it loosened. Slowly, quietly. One night, as I sketched Lucky with his head on my lap, I realized I hadn't thought about leaving in days. I hadn't rehearsed excuses or mapped bus routes or counted how many dollars I had left. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't surviving. I was living. It had been almost a month since that night on the roadside. I'd slipped into a rhythm. Early mornings with coffee and Lucky. Afternoons cleaning. Evenings sketching by the big glass window while the forest whispered outside. For the first time in a long time, life felt safe. And then she arrived. I was in the kitchen, kneading bread dough for dinner, when I heard the sound of tires on gravel. A sleek silver car I'd never seen before stopped outside the main house. A woman stepped out, tall, elegant, the kind of beauty you see in magazines. Hair glossy and perfect, heels clicking against the stone walkway. She didn't belong here in the quiet woods. She belonged somewhere loud, where people looked at her just to feel small. Ethan was on the porch when she approached. I couldn't hear what she said at first, but I saw him stiffen slightly, like someone bracing for bad weather. He led her inside. Something in my chest tightened, an ache I didn't have a name for. I told myself it didn't matter. Why would it? I was just the help, the girl who scrubbed floors and folded laundry. Whatever Ethan's life was beyond this property had nothing to do with me. Still, I couldn't stop my feet from moving closer, pausing just outside the dining room door where their voices carried. "Don't pretend you don't know why I'm here," she said, her tone smooth, almost sharp. "You're wasting your time with her. Jenna's none of your business, Alana." Ethan's voice was steady but colder than I'd ever heard it. "She's living on your property, playing house while you—" She stopped, probably noticing the shift in his eyes. "I'm just saying, you have a reputation. People will talk." There was a silence long enough to make my skin prickle. "Let them," Ethan said finally. "You don't get to tell me who I help." Alana scoffed. "Help? That's what you call it." That was enough. I stepped back, heart pounding, and hurried to the guest house before they could see me. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the mixing bowl. Help. That's all this was to him? I knew I should be grateful. I had a roof, a job, safety. I owed him more than I could ever repay. But hearing her words felt like being back in that apartment with Mark telling me I'd never be enough. Mom looking away because it was easier than choosing sides. That night, I barely touched dinner. Ethan didn't say anything, though he noticed. I could tell by the way he lingered in the doorway longer than usual, eyes narrowing slightly, like he wanted to ask but decided against it. Later, I packed a small bag, just in case. I'd learned not to stay anywhere too long, not to let roots take hold where they weren't welcome. But before I could zip it close, there was a knock. Ethan stood there, one hand on the doorframe, expression unreadable. "Elena's gone," he said simply. I nodded, avoiding his eyes. She made some good points. Maybe I shouldn't stop. His tone left no room for argument. "She doesn't speak for me. You're not going anywhere unless you want to. Understand?" I swallowed hard. "Why would you defend me? You barely know me." His gaze softened just slightly. "Because I know enough. You work hard. You don't take handouts. And you've brought life back into this place. Don't let one bitter voice chase you out." I didn't answer, because I didn't trust my voice not to crack. Instead, I nodded and sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling like my chest might cave in from relief, and something else I didn't want to name yet. Lucky curled against my feet, as if agreeing we weren't going anywhere. Not tonight. 2 days passed after Elena's visit, and things felt different. Ethan wasn't avoiding me, but there was a heaviness in his eyes I hadn't seen before, like he'd been carrying a weight I couldn't name. He still left early for work, still came home late, but now he lingered more, asking how my day was, what I'd drawn, whether Lucky had chewed another pair of boots. One evening, just as I was drying dishes, he stepped into the kitchen, cleared his throat, and leaned against the doorframe. "Can we talk?" I set the plate down carefully, because his tone wasn't casual. "Sure. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. It's about my parents." He paused, eyes drifting to the floor before meeting mine again. "They're coming to visit this weekend. It's complicated." I tilted my head. "Complicated how?" He hesitated. "My dad's health isn't great. Heart issues. And my mom worries about me, about him, about everything. I haven't exactly given them a reason to stop worrying." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They think I'm alone too much. They've wanted me to settle down, start a family." His mouth quirked as if he were laughing at himself. "This visit, they'll be pushing that again. And I don't want Dad stressing." I didn't see where this was going. "So, what do you need from me?" He took a deep breath, straightening his shoulders like he was about to negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal. "I want you to pretend to be my fiancé, just for the weekend." The dish towel slipped from my hand. "You're what?" "My fiancé. It doesn't have to be dramatic, just enough so my parents believe I'm happy, that I'm building a life. They'll go home relieved, and Dad won't worry himself sick." I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to say it was a joke. He didn't. "You want me, your housekeeper, to suddenly be your fiancé?" His jaw tightened slightly. "You're more than a housekeeper, Jenna. And yes, I'm asking you. Because I trust you, and you make this place feel alive again." My cheeks burned. I turned away, fumbling with the towel. "Ethan, this is crazy. What if they see through it? What if I mess up?" "You won't. You're honest, and you care about people. That's all they need to see." The silence stretched. My mind raced. Images of me, smiling awkwardly next to Ethan while his mother eyed me. His father wondering who I was. Every instinct told me to say no. I'd spent most of my life trying not to stand out, and this would put me directly in the spotlight. But then I saw something in Ethan's expression. An edge of vulnerability, like he hated asking, but needed to anyway. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted to help him the way he'd helped me. I exhaled slowly. "Fine, I'll do it. But if this backfires, I'm blaming you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Deal. That night, he told me about his childhood, how his dad taught him to fish at the Columbia River, how his mom knitted scarves for every winter, how their tiny house in the coastal town still smelled like cedar and salt water. He hadn't been home as much since his company grew, and guilt laced every word when he talked about it. Listening to him, I realized this wasn't just about keeping his parents happy. It was about him trying to make up for lost time, to give them peace when he couldn't be there as much as they deserved. And I couldn't help but think, this man who saved me on a dark road, who gave me work and safety, now trusted me to save him in return, even if it was just an act. When he handed me a small jewelry box the next day, a simple silver band to make it convincing, my fingers trembled as I slid it onto my left hand. It was supposed to be pretend, but as I looked at my reflection, a strange thought whispered through me. What if it didn't feel like it? The day Ethan's parents arrived, the air around the house felt different, like it had been holding its breath all morning. I stood by the window, smoothing the front of the soft blue dress Ethan had picked out for me, feeling like a stranger in my own skin. Lucky sat by my feet, tilting his head as if to say, "You sure about this?" "No," I whispered back, even though I smiled at him. Ethan walked in, freshly shaven, wearing a button-down I'd only ever seen hanging untouched in his closet. He stopped for a second, looking at me. Not a long stare, not dramatic, but long enough for heat to rise in my cheeks. "You look perfect," he said quietly, then cleared his throat and straightened his cuffs like he hadn't just said that. Before I could respond, tires crunched on the driveway. A silver sedan appeared, and out stepped a woman with kind eyes and a scarf wrapped around her neck, followed by a man with silver hair and a careful, slow walk. "Ready?" Ethan asked. I nodded, gripping the simple silver band on my left hand, the one he'd given me to sell the story. My pulse drummed in my ears as we stepped outside. "Mom, Dad, this is Jenna," Ethan said, and his hand slipped into mine, warm and steady. "My fiancée." His mother's eyes widened in surprise, then softened into joy so quickly it made my chest ache. She pulled me into a hug without hesitation, her voice trembling slightly. "Welcome to the family, dear." I was starting to think I'd never get to meet the one who tamed him. I laughed nervously, but Ethan squeezed my hand once. A silent "you're doing fine." His dad shook my hand firmly, studying me with sharp eyes that still somehow held warmth. "He's lucky, you know," he said, nodding toward Ethan. "Don't let him forget it." The weekend unfolded like a dance I hadn't rehearsed for but somehow knew the steps to. We cooked together, shared stories around the fire pit, even took a slow walk along the property line while his parents reminisced about raising Ethan near the ocean. I played my part, smiling, leaning into Ethan's arm when his mother asked how we met, laughing at a story about him falling out of a tree when he was 8. It should have felt fake, but it didn't. The way he looked at me, steady and warm, made it feel alarmingly real. On the second night, after his parents had gone to bed, I sat on the porch, staring at the stars. Ethan joined me, handing over a cup of tea. "You were amazing today," he said softly. They haven't smiled like that in a long time. "It's not hard to like them," I said, cradling the warm mug. "They're good people." He nodded, quiet for a while. "You remind me of what home used to feel like." The words settled in my chest, heavy and light all at once. I looked at him, really looked, and for a moment I forgot we were pretending. His hand was resting next to mine on the porch railing, close enough that I could feel the heat from his skin. I pulled back before it went too far. This was temporary. It had to be. The next morning, his mom gave me a gift, a soft, hand-knitted scarf in shades of cream and gray. "I made this last winter, not knowing who it was for," she said, smiling. "Now I do." Something inside me cracked. No one outside my mom, well before everything went wrong, had ever made me something by hand. I hugged her, hiding the sting in my eyes. When they finally drove away Sunday afternoon, waving until the car disappeared down the road. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "You okay?" Ethan asked. I nodded, clutching the scarf. "Yeah, they're wonderful." "They loved you," he said simply, watching me with that unreadable expression again. And for the briefest moment, I wished it wasn't pretend. I wished every word I'd said, every look we'd shared was real. But wishes are dangerous things. The house felt too quiet after his parents left, like their warmth had lingered in the walls but then slipped out the door with them. I walked into the guest house, still holding the scarf his mother had made, soft and warm against my fingers, and sat on the bed. It had been pretend. Every smile, every touch, every fiancé whispered in front of them, it was all an act. Yet my chest ached, like I'd just lost something real. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the way Ethan had looked at me when his mom hugged me, the way his fingers brushed mine when we'd reached for the same coffee mug. He was kind, steady, safe. And I was falling for him, hard. But people like me didn't get to fall for people like him. I'd been a runaway, a girl with no family to introduce, no grand plan for the future. He was successful, established, the kind of man who had options, and I was just the option that happened to be convenient. The next morning, I made a decision. When Ethan came down for coffee, I was already at the counter, bag packed and Lucky's leash in my hand. His brow furrowed instantly. "Going somewhere?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, I think it's time. You've done so much for me, Ethan, more than anyone has in a long time. But I can't keep staying here. I don't belong." He stared, stunned silent for a second. "You don't belong? Jenna, where is this coming from?" I swallowed hard, gripping the leash tighter. "You don't need me. You just wanted a fake fiancé for a weekend. And I let myself believe it was more. That's my mistake, not yours." His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "Is that really what you think? That you were some prop? What else would it be?" I whispered. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine. "Do you have any idea what you've done since you walked into my life? This house used to be silent. I came home every night to empty rooms and noise only from the fridge running. And then you showed up with a stray dog and a sketchbook, and suddenly it felt like home again." I blinked, startled. "Ethan, no. You need to hear this." His voice softened, deep and rough all at once. "When I asked you to pretend, it wasn't because I needed a lie. It was because I wanted my parents to see what I've started to feel, even if I couldn't say it yet. You weren't a stand-in. You were you. Something inside me cracked open. I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone to choose me. Not for what I could do, not for what I could give, but just for being me. I felt the sting in my eyes before the tears fell. Why would you care about someone like me?" He reached up, gently brushing his thumb against my cheek to catch a tear. "Because you're stronger than you think, Jenna. You walked away from a life that crushed you, and you're still standing. You make art out of pain. You care about every living thing you touch, even strays like me." That made me laugh through the tears, and he smiled, soft and crooked, like he hadn't done that in years. "Please don't go," he said quietly. "Not because I need help in this house. Not because of some fake story. Stay because I don't want us to end." The word us landed like sunlight after rain, warm and startling. I dropped the leash and stepped closer, the scarf still clutched in my hand. "Okay," I whispered, barely audible. "I'll stay." Lucky barked once, as if sealing the deal, and Ethan laughed, a real laugh, deep and unguarded. Then he pulled me into his arms, slow and certain, like he was afraid to break the moment. For the first time in years, I wasn't running from something. I was running toward someone. 3 months later, the guest house wasn't a guest house anymore, it was home. My clothes hung neatly in the closet. Lucky had his own bed by the window, and my sketchbook collection had doubled, then tripled, until I had to buy a shelf just to hold them all. Ethan's parents visited more often now. Each time, His mother hugged me like I'd always been hers, slipping another homemade scarf or a jar of her peach jam into my hands. His dad teased Ethan about finally growing up, but every word dripped with pride. They didn't look at me like I was pretending anymore, because I wasn't, and neither was Ethan. We were still learning each other, still figuring out what it meant to be two people from different worlds, choosing the same path. But there was no pretending in the way he reached for my hand at the grocery store, or the way his eyes softened every time I laughed, or how he sat quietly on the porch while I sketched, like he didn't want to disturb a sacred moment. One crisp Saturday morning, he told me to dress nicely. "Just something comfortable," he said, grinning like he was keeping a secret. I followed him to a small building in town, with a scent of oil paints and paper hung thick in the air. It was an art gallery. My art gallery. He'd spoken to the owner weeks ago, showing her my sketches without telling me. Now they hung on the walls, Lucky curled on the porch, the forest mist behind the guest house. Ethan himself leaning against the railing with that thoughtful expression he always tried to hide. My throat tightened as people walked around, studying them, pointing out their favorites. "Ethan, I can't believe you did this." "You deserve it," he said simply, standing behind me, his hand warm on my shoulder. "You gave this place life again. Let people see what you see." That afternoon, a woman bought one of my drawings, a simple pencil sketch of the guest house. I stood there in shock as she handed over the check, whispering, "There's so much peace in it. It feels like home." Home. That word used to feel dangerous to me, like something that could vanish without warning. But now it felt steady, like roots finally finding soil. Later, after everyone left, I stood in front of one last piece, the one Ethan had secretly convinced me to finish for the opening. It showed all of us together, Ethan, his parents, Lucky at our feet, and me, smiling in a way I hadn't known I could. I traced the edge of the frame with my fingertips, heart full. "I think I'm finally done running," I said softly. Ethan stepped beside me, slipping an arm around my waist. "Good," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the top of my head, "because I wasn't planning to let you anyway." I leaned into him, the smell of cedar and coffee wrapping around me like the scarf his mother had made, and smiled. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't wondering where I belonged. I already knew. I belonged here with Ethan, with Lucky, with a life I'd built from the ashes of everything I'd lost. And it was just the beginning.